So, Bruce, my first question for you is, could you further explain what smart digital transformation means in the context of private equity and why it's more than just IT and digital marketing?
Yes. So the way I kind of look at, I mean, if you think of digital transformation, it's such an overused term that it almost has lost its meaning. And particularly in private equity, when we talk digital, often what I'll get back is, oh, that's IT. And that is a type of digital transformation, no doubt. If you're moving a payroll system from, and again, I'll go old school, from some QuickBooks or something like that to something more sophisticated, or even something even less sophisticated than QuickBook, that is a transformation, and digital is part of it. But I kind of look at digital transformation in three different layers. The first layer is that IT and the ERP layer. And the second layer, I look at it as, let's say, robotics and RPA systems. RPA systems are kind of like robots, but they're soft robots and they click on interfaces. And so let's say the first one is more the infrastructure level. The second layer is more the operations layer. And then the smart layer, this is the technology, like I was saying before, the two main ones being Internet of Things, artificial intelligence slash data science, also augmented reality, let's say 3D printing, things like that. And the difference there, if from a smart perspective, is the concept of using proprietary data, as I mentioned earlier. And that's really the key for everyone listening, is that if you think about your company, or if you think about a portfolio company, there's going to be data in that company that can be used to create value. It's really as simple as that. And where I focus more is not so much on the operations layer, as I was saying before, but more on, so for manufacturing, as an example, you might have heard of, listeners, you may have heard of Industry 4.0 or Industrial Internet of Things. And that's the process of using data, again, for efficiency. So now if we start looking at value creation, we can look at the three different areas of value creation. The first one being revenue growth, and that breaks down in about five different areas, if you like, of how I kind of look at a company. The second one is margin. And the reason I bring that up is in manufacturing, that's what you're doing. You're trying to improve the margins, and you're using technology to make things more efficient. And then the third one, where I help these, let's say, old school companies, is on the valuation model. There's a few different areas that you can garner, you can ratchet up the valuation multiple, which is very important when you're thinking about selling it, whether you're selling to a private sponsor. But it's the process of, literally transforming a company that is really analog. Let's call it analog. Let's say that they make things made out of metal, which a number of clients do, big metal, pounded in this place by hand. Sometimes it's manufactured with different machines. But in that area, if you transform the company, and generally the process is just at a very high level, come up with a digital investment thesis, come up with a digital transformation plan, execute that digital transformation plan, and then prepare for exit. But if you look at the exit multiple, generally what we're doing is we're creating structural changes within the company and changing them from bending metal companies to companies that now incorporate software engineers and incorporate data scientists with the organization. And those structural changes, among others, another one is the digital, which comes from just being more like a digital. When you start looking at comps, when you're selling the company. So where I focus mostly though on is not on margins, although we can do margins, but I believe there's a heck of a lot more opportunity when we start looking at revenue, and then what I just mentioned on valuation multiple. And so for the revenue, this can come in a number of different ways, but it all comes again from proprietary data. So that can be from innovation. And so this is going to market share expansion. So if you have a more innovative product, you're using digital, that would be one example. There's customer expansion. There's market expansion, as I was saying. There's pricing. There's around five different areas that we focus on, and we kind of look at each of those areas. But at a high level, again, when we go back to the digital transformation, what I think separates it from, let's say, the infrastructure and the operational is that we're using this data, we're transforming it into useful information. Generally, I'm focused on the product. And that product can be infrastructure. It could be operating that product. It could be selling that product. So yeah, I don't know if that's clear enough. That's kind of the differentiation, at least in how I approach digital transformation.
Yeah, that's great, Bruce. I appreciate it. And you touch on some ideas that a lot of a lot of folks or firms don't think about in the context of digital transformation, and they should, right? Like as you'd mentioned, margins, evaluation multiple, digital investment thesis, looking at the comps, exit multiple, revenue from proprietary data. I mean, those are great ideas to be sure. So as you'd mentioned in your intro, Bruce, you were a key player in an AI startup. You wrote a book on IoT. So, and this is kind of a general higher level question, but how can private equity firms leverage high technologies like AI and IoT to create meaningful business value within their portfolio companies? What would you have to say to that? That's one question that we get frequently. And I'm curious what your response would be to that one.
Um, so yeah, at a very high level, we do the same thing as when a P firm is purchasing a company. They're going to come up with their investment thesis and they're going to look at creation levers. Similarly, what we do is we come up with a digital investment thesis, and that digital investment thesis, I can get into the nuts and bolts, but what we're doing is very familiar. We're looking at customer retention. Is there a way that we can apply technology to the value, the overall lifetime value of the customer? We're looking at how do we expand market share, as I was mentioned before. That's generally going to be innovation. So that's going to be making what you sell better, so that you get more market share. We look at customer expansion as well, and that is how do we sell more to our existing customers. And that can be through. I'm a big fan of service business and connecting the data that we get from the products to generating high margin service business. Consumables also is an area where we can do it. But just keeping on rattling it off, product expansion is when we collect this proprietary data, we can often see in the data that there's opportunities for new products to be developed. And so this is a concept that we based on that's called the digital twin. Once you can build in analytics into the product, you can understand how the customers use your product and what they use your product for. So that's a usability model. These are artificial intelligence models that we incorporate in almost every single engagement that we do. And then there's pricing optimization. So, everything I've mentioned here, pricing optimization, when you can understand how your customers using your product and how they're making money from using your product. So this is now, I haven't really talked about business models, but business models is an area also of value creation. So answering your question, how do we create value? But when we can understand how our customers, and our customers, when I say our customers, I mean our portfolio companies, how they are making money, we can then quantify the value that we are providing our customers to make their money. And once we can quantify the value that we produce to have our customers make their money, if you're following the chain of events, then we can really
Yeah.
we can now price our products, and this can be a service as well. And generally they are services and getting to the business model. But generally when we can quantify, and this is why I keep on mentioning proprietary data, but when we can quantify how our customers are making money with our product, again, the portfolio company's product, we can then price it very accurately. So, you have got cost plus pricing, and of course, there's many firms that many of your listeners may use for pricing that are focused, strictly on finding the right price. But when you have the data for how the customers are making, then you can price it very, very accurately, and that becomes a value. And then moving into the business model side, I haven't touched on or the exit model, but these are all the ways how we do it. But I'm still going high level just to say that we do the exact same thing. But now we start getting into somewhere where we maybe diverge, whereas you might have an operating partner for pricing. You might have an operating partner that has really good marketing experience. And so you can try to expand your market share just through marketing, not necessarily innovation. But when we can understand the business model of our customers, we can invert our business model, and again, the business model of the portfolio. We can invert our business model, or we can create a whole different business model that interfaces with their business. And there's in my first book, if anyone wants to get into detail, there's really five, I believe pretty much every single business model for these five business models. But we can move through the various different business models to provide one that is a win-win, in the sense that the customer, since we're quantifying the value that we produce, and that's very important that you quantify the value. It's not just, it's going to be better and it's going to be more valuable. It's going to be more value by this amount, and it's going to add this much value to your customers. But once we can do that, we can build a business model that interfaces with theirs, such that it's a win-win. So let me give you the most basic business model is a one and done product sale. So we'll use Teslas. So you buy a Tesla, pay your money, and it's done. Now it's a little different with Tesla, and it's a little different in the products that other companies, in that what we do, unlike GM is catching on them, but unlike old school car manufacturer, once the sale is made, and in fact, you don't even make the sale, it's done through a distribution network, and so you don't even know practically who the customer is. But Tesla, and that being a smart car, and then we can now apply the adjective, the adjective smart to product. So if you're listening, what does your company do? We can add smart to it. What's your portfolio companies do? We can add smart to that service or two. But once what they're doing initially in that initial business model is not only is selling it traditional, but they have this tethered connection through, again, this proprietary data, and this data is generally gathered from the Internet of Things. But there is a connection between Tesla and the customer, and Tesla and the product. And so, for example, we move into the next business model, and I was talking, and I can go more, but for the number two business model, this is a product and a service business model. And that is where you buy the product, but then there's an ongoing service that you can sell. This can be an information service. This can be, as I was saying, an actual practical service where you're turning wrenches. But Tesla does this, and I'll give an example. One of the things I really is fintech, because you can insure products. Once you understand how the product, remember I mentioned the usability and utility model. Once we understand how the customer uses the product, we can then insure that product in a way that's profitable, very profitable for us, and probably lower cost to the customer. As an example, Tesla now is going to be offering car insurance. Now, my daughter, who would be demographically she's now in her 20s, but when she was a teen, I remember when they were both on the payroll, I was paying for their car insurance. As my son, I have a son who's a couple of years than my daughter. Now, my daughter was the worst driver in the world. She was a speed demon. She got into a couple accidents, including with my car, her car. Where on the other side, my son, he drove like an old lady, but their insurance premiums. My son's premium was almost double. So this is an example of a product service business model where one type of service, and there could be many others, but for continuing analogy or example, it would be car insurance. And if you know how and this is going back to what I mentioned earlier, when you have proprietary data and you have that connection between you and the customer's product, you can then gather information for a variety of different reasons, but one of them is to sell services. So that would be a product service business model. And the next step beyond that would be a service business model. And I guess we'll use the car example. That would be one service business model for a car would be you pay for how many miles you drive it. Now, it could be like a lease where you pay for how many months you drive it. So that's just the time dimension. So the pivot variable there is the time dimension. But you could do a number of miles driven. And so if you think about an industrial product, let's say it's a wood chipper. I'm just making this up. You could introduce, you being the portfolio company, you could introduce a business model that says, we're going to own this wood chipper, but we're going to let you have it. And the business model will be the more you use the wood chipper, the more you will pay us. And implied in that is if you're using the wood chipper, you're making money from using that wood chipper. So that's an example of a win-win and a different type of business model, let's say, than a traditional company would consider, like a wood chipper, because they don't have that proprietary data that I was talking about earlier. So how do we make money for these companies is really at a high level the exact same way that private equity firms make money for these companies today. Maybe not so much on the business model, but a little bit on the business model. But we use the digital technology and, again, this data, this proprietary data, to then translate into value.